Okay, welcome back, everybody. Good morning. So I've been doing some research for the next part of the documentary, and I found a lot of random information that I just want to share with you real quick. I was looking up Jekyll Island because we're going to be talking about the Federal Reserve. It's off the coast of Georgia, and I believe from 1910 to 1913, a lot of bigwigs got here, and over the summers, they planned out what's called the Federal Reserve, which is the fiat banking system that controls our country and controls most countries across the world. And yeah, over the course of a few years, some nice summer vacations, this is where they came up with it. Now, here, this is kind of a small picture, but let me read you the names of the people who partook in this. The Federal Reserve Board, as they took office on August 10th, 1914, from left to right. Okay, so this would be after it's implemented by Woodrow Wilson, I believe. So there's Paul Warburg, John Williams, who is the comptroller of the currency, W.P.G. Harding, Adolph Miller, Charles Hamlin, who was the governor, William McAdoo, who was the chairman, and Frederick A. Delano. Well, if you've been watching my episodes for a little bit, then you know that Delano, let me check this out. Mr. Delano's house, family house, is in Portland, Maine. Now, this house belongs to a generation or two before, but nonetheless, same Delano family, and we're talking about the same Delano family that the Roosevelts are related to, giving us Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And in Portland, Maine, this is the Delano House, built 1800. Of course, the doorway is a Masonic archway, right? And that's why the sky is painted right here, and that's why the light is inside the firmament, because that's what that stands for. And you can see here, painted on their house, is Lucifer. I found this right there. Boom. Plain as day. The Delano family. Very powerful family. I'm still doing some research on them, but I'm pretty sure they were involved in the Opium Wars and I think Yale University, so they are an established, powerful American family. So yeah, the first board of the Federal Reserve had a Delano on it, of course. And let's get into some of the weird stuff. I was listening to an interview where this guy went to Jekyll Island and met with the museum director, and this wasn't that long ago, and he spent the day with the museum director. Apparently, this was an Indian hunting ground and establishment back in the day. So it was called the Wale tribe. I think it's spelled Gualle or something. The Wale tribe were this coastal tribe of natives, and before the English settled this, it was settled by Spanish Jesuits. There's actually a Jesuit cemetery on the island, and here's a photo of Joseph Dubmignon's grave. I think that's how you say that. Who was a Jesuit, one of the early people. So yeah, the Jesuits came first, 1700s, and then came the English. And when this guy went and met with the museum director, apparently they had unearthed a native burial ground, and this guy got to see it because what they did, they didn't fully exhume all the bodies. They exposed the bones and then built the museum on top of it. I think it's still there to this day. And this guy was saying that they were average 8.5 feet tall. And this theme comes up all the time in basically the hidden history of the Americas. Giants have been found in thousands of places. A lawsuit forced the Smithsonian to admit they destroyed the skeletons of countless giants and hid records about giants. So you can choose not to believe it. You can believe the mainstream and think it's all ridiculous, but all the evidence and all the facts, physical facts, are there. So this burial ground on Jekyll Island had giant natives, and they also went to a museum of artifacts, and the guy being interviewed mentioned how, I don't know my bows, but you know how one bow is like a single piece of wood? I think it's called a recurve bow. And then there's compound bows. And he said in all of his studies across the country, he had never seen a native compound bow. But these natives on Jekyll Island happened to have them. A lot of other weird things going on too. The tour guide was explaining, like the museum curator was saying, this was a mound culture. And if you know anything about the mound culture, they were basically in all different parts of the country, and they're known for their incredible well, what they've left to us is incredible archaeoastronomy. So these mounds aren't just random. They are all lined up astronomically. And what it tells us is they had a complex and very advanced understanding of the movement of the heavenly bodies. So they're not telling us stuff about North America. The story of the New World is one of the greatest deceptions. Only gravity and space are bigger deceptions than the New World. So they go on, they're talking about these artifacts and these giant Indians, and he eventually checks out the cottages because each one of these powerful families built a cottage. And the Rockefellers intentionally built their cottage on top of a mound. This is the actual plaque on Jekyll Island. This is the Rockefeller Cottage. Notice the seal of Georgia is a Masonic arch, and then the third pillar is in the middle. We can get into that another day. Of course, the ribbon looks a lot like a serpent. So, Indian Mound Rockefeller Cottage. This cottage was built by the younger brother of John D. Rockefeller, William G. Rockefeller, 1841 to 1922, one of the millionaire members of the Jekyll Island Club. Built around 1900, it was called Indian Mound because of its adjacency to the old Indian Mound, believed to be a burial mound of the Wale Indians of Muskegon stock, who were the last Indian inhabitants of Jekyll Island. So these guys were giants with advanced for, standards of the time, bow and arrows. And the tour guide goes on to say, so they find out they're both Christians, guy being interviewed and the museum curator. And he's like, you know what, I should tell you, after they establish, it's cool that they're friends and stuff. The curator says that the Rockefellers intentionally built their cottage directly on top of an altar that belonged to the Wale Indians. And this altar, according to what's in the museum, according to some of the carvings, was used for sacrifice, for human sacrifice of children. The Rockefellers intentionally left it there and built the house on top of it, and the curator actually brought the guy inside in the parlor, that's where it is, and at one end of the room, there's a little spot the curator knows of where you're standing on top of a sacrificial altar that was left there. And the Rockefeller family built their cottage on top of it on purpose. So that's a curveball. If we're just talking about discovering the New World and finding savages, as they call them, why would somebody do that? They're not telling us the truth about the New World. Absolutely not. So that's a fantastic and amazing thing. So William Rockefeller was doing that. What was his brother doing up north? Let's go to Mount Desert Island in Maine. Desert Island, Maine. And so basically, the hidden history of the New World is that it was already civilized. There never was an old and new world. There never was this divide. There was never this loss of communication. The world's always been the world, just one. It's always just been the world. I mean, come on, don't sell our ancestors that short, that they weren't smart enough to realize there was more to the earth than what was around them. It's a ridiculous concept. It's an archaic theory that the two worlds were separate. I think that is completely false in written history. But you can believe what you want. These are my opinions. So this kind of ties into Tartaria. You've probably heard of that before. It's not something I've really looked into that much, but basically the idea is that this civilization called Tartaria had already settled the whole world, right? And they were written out of history after being annihilated from the world, and aspects of North America were more advanced than what we know and what they tell us because they were Tartarian, all sorts of stuff. I don't really go that deep into it because honestly I think it's a psyop with a little bit of truth sprinkled into it, so be careful looking into that. But I think some of the truth around it involves the settling of the New World, specifically the slave trade. And basically what we're going to get into is the idea of Europeans coming to the New World, specifically North America, and instead of importing slaves from Africa, they were actually exporting slaves from North America. I'm not trying to say the African slave trade didn't exist. There were millions and millions and millions of African slaves in the New World, but they were mainly in Central and South America working on sugar, silver, and gold. In North America, the big lie I think they're telling us is they weren't importing that many African slaves. They were exporting slaves who happened to be of African descent. I know that sounds crazy. Okay, this is just a fun episode. We're not serious right now. But the Washita Nation is a group of natives who claim to be of African descent. In fact, they claim to be of northwestern Moorish African descent, like Morocco area. Now, Wikipedia, of course, is going to deny this. Let's read a little. The Washita Nation is a group associated with the Moorish Science Temple of America, who claim to be a sovereign state of Native Americans within the boundaries of the United States of America. Their name is appropriated from that of the Washita tribe, who are also eponymous with the Washita River, and of Washita, Oklahoma. The group is part of a sovereign citizen movement whose members generally believe that they are not subject to any statutes or proceedings at the federal, state, and municipal levels. So we're being speculative, but if the real history is there were already settlements in North America from the, quote, old world, end quote, and the Europeans arrived here, then perhaps they were selling slaves back to the old world. I know that sounds a little crazy, but this Moorish Science Temple of America is not a joke. It really isn't. In fact, look at this photo of 1928. So these people claim Moorish ancestry. Who are we not to believe them, right? Very interesting, right? They look African. They are African, obviously, but they weren't brought here from Africa during the slave trade, right? No, they were here the whole time. That's what these people say. Pretty crazy, right? They are clearly African. And what kind of native tribe practices temple worship like this? They look like Freemasons, right? See the hand over the heart on these two guys in the front? The sashes, the fezzes, the hats. Here's a, basic Masonic symbol, the hand over the heart. So something's going on here, you guys. Something is going on here. And the way I'll connect this together is that Rockefeller probably built that cottage for a much more esoteric and metaphysical reason than we know. In fact, the whole story of the New World, like I've been saying, I think they might be lying to us. Now, I mentioned going up north to Mount Desert Island, right here. This is another retreat that all the same people would frequent every summer. So, come here to Bar Harbor. Bar Harbor is a little town. That's where the Masonic Lodge is. So, like, all over this island, they built all these elaborate, beautiful cottages. Like, incredible. And Rockefeller, John Jr., created a network of cottage roads all through these mountains so they could ride their horse and cottage with, arched bridges and stuff. There's a very secretive science laboratory here called the Jackson Laboratory. Very mysterious place. And last time I was there, I've probably mentioned this, but I'm going to mention it again. So there's a park called Otter Cliffs, and I'm not sure exactly where it is, but I walked all the ways out to the water off the trail. Like, it's pretty treacherous, wet rock and everything, something that no one really does, but I love doing that. I went all the ways to the water, and the water's rough, and I found this plaque. You're not going to believe this. This is a photo of it, obviously. John D. Rockefeller, Jr., 1874 to 1960. These groves of spruce and fir, these granite ledges, this magnificent window on the sea, were given to the United States by John D. Rockefeller, Jr. He was among the first to sense the need to preserve America's natural beauty and to set high standards of environmental quality. This quiet, dedicated conservationist gave generously of his time, wisdom, and resources to help establish this park and others for the physical, cultural, and spiritual benefit of the American people. This is completely invisible. You literally have to walk 50 feet off the trail onto the treacherous rocks with the huge waves coming in, and this plaque is facing the ocean. It's on the flat face of a piece of granite facing the ocean. It cannot be seen unless you go all the ways to the water and turn around. It's like a video game Easter egg. I kid you not. I will take anyone there. It exists. In fact, I found it on Markers, Monuments, Memorials of Mount Desert Island. I've been looking for it forever. It exists. So if you go to like Wikipedia, or if you go to Bar Harbor and try to research where did Acadia National Park come from, they're going to tell you a bunch of people got together. No, it was one person, John Rockefeller Jr., whose brother, or maybe a generation before brother, William Rockefeller built his cottage on an island down south, Jekyll Island, on top of a sacrificial altar of the Wale natives. And when you incorporate some of the aspects of Tartaria, the basic general idea of it, that North America was established and the English exported slaves into the Atlantic, slave triangle system, then it's pretty shocking. I'm thinking something's coming together in my head. This is just a brainstorm. Now, I have a primary source here I want to show you. This is Signal Magazine from 1940 to 1942. The article date's not listed here, but it's from an article called The Front Against Bolshevism, and it's talking about the Germans' allies on the Eastern Front. Let me read some off. Italians, Finns, Hungarians, Romanians, Slovaks, Cossacks, Spaniards, Turkestans, Walloons, Azerbaijans, whatever they're called, Armenians, Frenchmen, Georgians, Caucasians, Croats. The most important one, though. So, like I said, the idea of Tartaria, I think they put a lot of lies into that, but check that out. Hold on. What's that one at the top? The Volga Tatars. So the Tatar is a real thing, and the area of Tartaria is the same. And through my research this morning, I think Tatar and Tartar are just two versions of the same word. T-A-R-T-A-R and then T-A-T-A-R. Because, quick research shows that they're talking about the exact same area, like the Ural Mountains. So basically, there's this concept that there was a sort of global civilization. I'm not saying they had space technology, but I'm saying that the world was already globalized a while ago, and it probably always was. And this idea of old and new world, I think that's fake. Honestly, I do. I believe that's fake. And now I'm going to start looking into this Moorish temple. I'm going to start looking into the actual provable parts of this Tartarian idea. And I start finding out that there were already African-descended people here. And they even claim that they were, sent away as slaves. And, I bring this up because everything we look at is the inverse of the mainstream. I swear. And I think you guys can attest to that, right? Like every time we research something, whether it's the Civil War or the moon landing or space, anything, it is literally the inverse of the mainstream. I'm starting to think that's what the craft is. The craft is crafting the Matrix. For real, think about it. Everything's a lie. Everything. So, what we are looking at, Mount Desert Island here, is called Acadia National Park. It's basically this whole Mount Desert, and then it's this little spot over here called Big Moose Island, and this is a Rockefeller institution that we're going to be talking about. So they are still very involved here. Helicopter pad, everything. Let's see. So, Acadia is synonymous with Arcadia, and Arcadia, or Utopia, is the place where Pan lives, right? Pan. From which the Baphomet is derived. Pan. We'll talk about Pan. Arcadia refers to a vision of pastoralism and harmony with nature. The term is derived from the Greek province of the same name, which dates to antiquity. The province's mountainous topography and sparse population. I'll look in antiquity after. But you see this painting on the right? This was one of the attractions to Mount Desert Island during the Rockefeller days, like the early 1900s. There was a body of art called like the Hudson River School, and they were like young painters, and a lot of them came to Acadia to paint places like this. So basically, Arcadia or Acadia National Park was a vacation spot for the elite, for the wealthy, and for the occultist, for the intellectual aristocracy, for the Freemasonic enlightened Northerners. They would go there, and they equated this place with basically the Garden of Pan. Let me look up Pan real quick. You guys know Pan. Wow, I'm surprised the god's not the first thing that comes up. Sculpture, religion, there we go. He's a Greek god. It's loading. In ancient Greek religion or mythology, Pan is the god of the wild, shepherds and flocks, nature of mountain wilds, rustic music and impromptus, and companion of the nymphs. Yeah, a very sexual, Luciferian, sun-worshipping. See, he's got the horns, right? He seduces people. Yeah, often associated with sexuality. So it's named Acadia because of this ancient idea, right? This ancient idea that's carried on by the Freemasonic enlightened northern people even to this day. Now let's read this little thing, Acadia versus Arcadia. This is a blog. Over on my other blog, I recently wrote about a trip to the Scudic Peninsula, and that's where the Rockefeller Institution is that we're going to be taking a look at, right by Mount Desert Island. On the coast of Maine, part of Acadia National Park, this leads to a question. What is the difference between Acadia and Arcadia? The short answer is that the original word was Arcadia, in reference to ancient Greece, but the R got dropped at a point in history. Actually goes on to quote Wikipedia. There is much more than that. In the early 1500s, the Florentine explorer Giovanni di Verrazzano, sailing on behalf of France in voyages of exploration to the New World, used the name Arcadia with the R as in the Greek name for all the North American coast north of Virginia because of the unspoiled, harmonious wilderness. Yeah, there's actually some pictures, and actually all over the country they would use Acadia and Arcadia when they were trying to sell this property back to Europeans, like the first explorers, right? They would discover an area, and of course, untouched beauty, they would say, and they would call it Acadia or Arcadia, once again referring to where Pan is from. Pan's garden, right? Pan, that sexual nature god. Unbelievable. That's actually where Canada comes from too. I swear, Acadian, Arcadian, Canadian. It's all in reference to this ancient Greek god of sexuality and impromptus. And when they say impromptus, you ever been in a situation where you know you shouldn't do something, but everything's moving so fast that somebody's able to say one thing and they convince you to do it? That's what an impromptu is. That's what Pan does. Pan will excite you and look until you get your guard down, and then you know the rest. So let's go back to the map. This is the Rockefeller Institute here. I think it's called the Scudic Institute. And so yeah, we have that, which is part of the Institute is in Acadia National Park. So I don't know what the law is around that, but And then over here, like I said, we have a really sketchy science lab. Can't remember what it's called. I'll have to do an episode about it because it actually is. The Jackson Laboratory. I can't remember who owns it. I think it's government affiliated. It's kind of sketchy. Okay. So we talked about that. Let's look at the dictionary real quick. And yeah, if you ever get the chance to go to Bar Harbor, let's actually look up some of the cottages. If you ever get a chance to go, it's absolutely incredible. I don't want to buy one. I'm talking about hold on. Yeah, so it's pretty incredible. There's all sorts of magnificent buildings that were built by all the robber barons and bankers. This was their playground, right? So, it's called the Scudic Institute at Acadia National Park. Welcome to the Scudic Institute. I can't really tell you what they do because climate change is a myth. So, it says pursuing collaborative solutions to critical environmental challenges through discovery and learning. Not sure what environmental challenges are actually real. If you hover over science, it just says bird ecology, forest ecology, marine ecology, citizen science, and then a big COVID-19 quote right here. Quote, I felt safe and comfortable throughout my visit at Scudic, especially after learning about all of their additional COVID-19 protocols. Scudic has clearly thought thoroughly about both the safety of their staff and their customers. Everyone on campus was on the same page and in agreement on how to keep everyone safe. Thank you for a great visit. Okay, so can't really tell you what this is, and I don't think anybody really knows what this is. To me, it just looks like another example of an institute, a place where they can secretly do things under the guise of environmental solutions. And I say that because, I mean, we know plenty about the Rockefellers and their institutions, but let's look at the 1886 definition of institution. It's on the left here. I'm not going to zoom in anymore because it messes up the page. Okay, an institute. Institute as a verb. It comes from Latin, instituere, and from, I think, Indo, statuary. That makes sense. Statute, institute, okay. To cause, to stand, to set. Okay. Here's the modern 1886 one. 1. To set up, to establish, to erect, to appoint, to ordain, as to institute laws and rules. So already right off the bat, institute's a powerful word. To ordain, to establish, to erect, right? So we institute laws, okay? Number 2, to originate and establish, to found, as to institute a new order of nobility, to institute a court. So you don't institute, small things. Talking about institute of a new order, of a nobility, of a court. 3, to begin, to commence, to set in operation, to institute an inquiry, to institute a suit, like a court suit. 4, to ground or establish in principles, to educate, to instruct. 5, to invest with the spiritual part of a benefice, or the care of souls. Whoa. Oh, ecclesiastical law. To invest with the spiritual part of benefice, or the care of souls. Oh boy. This is how the English language was made to work, right? So they can say they have an institution called the Scudic Institute, but what definition are they using? Are they talking about souls? Probably. Okay, now is a noun. Number 1, anything instituted or formally established by law, settled order. 2, that which is established as authoritative or worthy of observance, precept, maximum, principle. 3, an institution, a literary and philosophical society, applied particularly to the principal society of this kind in France. 4, a book of elements or principles, particularly a work containing the principles of jurisprudence, as the Institutes of Gaius or Caius, of Justinian and Theophilus in the Roman law, and the Lord Coke in the common law. A department of medical instruction which treats of the principles of medicine, physiology applied to the practice of medicine, the person to whom an estate is first given by destination or limitation. Institution. 1, the act of instituting, establishment, foundation, enactment. The institution of God's laws by solemn injunction. Instruction, education. His learning was not the effect of precept or institution. The act or ceremony of investing a clergyman with the spiritual part of a benefice by which the care of souls is committed to his charge. What? What? Let's break that down. The act or ceremony of investing a clergyman with the spiritual part of a benefice by which the care of souls is committed to his charge. What? That's going to be some Catholic law thing. That's some pretty serious stuff. You think this is all metaphysical, but no, they treat souls as very real because souls are real, right? They're coming after our souls. Number 2, that which is instituted or established as a established order or method or custom, enactment, ordinance, permanent form of law or polity, the nature of our people, our cities, institutions, an established or organized society, an establishment, especially of a public character or affecting a community, a foundation, as a literary institution or a charitable institution, an organized society or an establishment meant to affect the community. 3, that which institutes or instructs a treaty or textbook, a system of elements or rules. So, clearly this has to do with the nobility and the elite, with law, with the Catholic Church. So they don't put all these definitions in anymore on purpose because they don't want you to know the way they use the English language. That's the whole thing going on here, guys, is that the English language was intentionally built this way, where everything can have more than one meaning. It's just like Freemasonry, it's just like tarot, it's just like the layers of symbols and everything that we talk about. The English language is the same way. For example, when a police officer says, "Do you understand?" and you say, "Yes, I understand," it's not the way we think it is. That literally, you just legally admitted and said to the officer that you do stand under his law. You give him permission to apply the law to you. I know that sounds confusing, but that's a true thing. So they take all these definitions out of the dictionary to keep us out of the light, so that they can create institutions. And if you ask anybody what an institution is, they're going to say, "Oh, they do charity work, or they do environmental work." That's what they say. That's what they are, when it's not true. The Rockefellers aren't lying about anything. It's just the people are dumb. That's the problem. So if we go back here to the Scudic Institute that says they are trying to find environmental solutions when there are no problems to be solved, in my opinion, I think in any rational opinion, where'd it go? What are they doing down here? With a helicopter pad, tennis court, baseball fields, all sorts of stuff. There's nothing new under the sun. Nothing has changed whatsoever. This building's actually pretty beautiful. Let me pull it up on the interwebs for you. So yeah, I just wanted to show you that the Rockefellers in two different places, the Rockefellers established plaques and set up coastal, like, island areas. And in one of them, in Jekyll Island in the south, came up with the Federal Reserve. And up here in the north, in Acadia, to this day, are still doing some sketchy stuff, perpetuating fake pandemics and fake global warming and globe theory and all their other BS under the guise of being an institution. And you better believe they probably still vacation there to this day. And I'm sure some awful, awful things have happened in the woods of Acadia National Park. I'm going to find out where they happened. Okay, this is the building. Here's Rockefeller Hall at Acadia National Park. It's just one example. It's a playground of the wealthy. Here's an example of one of the cottage roads. So a cottage will go under, or the river's under, and then the cottages could ride on top. Only for cottages. Like that, everything's shaped just for horse and carriage. It's amazing. Pretty incredible stuff. So let's recap. I think I have one more thing. I know this was super random, but hold on. So this was one of the things I was reading about, and some of this guy's ideas are completely false, I'll say that. And he believes in like a higher consciousness and all this stuff, that the Tartarians had all free energy, all this crap. What I was interested in was his research on the slave trade, because you can go to the archives of Spain, of the colonies, of England, of Portugal, and you cannot find millions of slaves. Now, these were precious cargo. This was big money. These things were recorded. We knew exactly how many people could fit on one boat, right? You've seen that graphic before. And there's no way, when you're talking about hundreds of dollars per person, that they're not going to have detailed archived records of this. And let's read. Another huge New World Order lie, the transatlantic slave trade out of Africa. So the story goes, some 12.5 million Africans were taken from their homes and forced aboard slave ships that were destined for the New World. About 10.7 million people survived the horrors of the Middle Passage between 1526 and 1866, only to end up in bondage on sugar, rice, cotton, and tobacco plantations throughout the Americas and the Caribbean. The transatlantic slave trade is the largest forced migration in history. Black people are indigenous to the Americas. Black Native Americans are not a result of the so-called Red Indian mixing with slaves. The so-called Red Indian comes from mixing with the European colonists and the Asians that were in America before Columbus. The first Native Americans were Mongolian, Tartarians. Melville Herskovit, a European anthropologist, was one of the originators of the out-of-Africa theory. Herskovitz never had any historical, archaeological, or anthropological proof that black people of the Americas were derived from West and North Africa. So, he was just talking about the Mongolian Tartarians, and that's exactly what this 1940 to 1942 Nazi magazine has in it. They're called Volga Tartarians, and if you look at the picture closely, they look like Mongolians. Fascinating. I gotta reread this part. Hold on. The first Native Americans were Mongolian Tartarians. Melville Herskovitz, a European anthropologist, was one of the originators of the out-of-Africa theory. Herskovitz never had any historical, archaeological, or anthropological proof that black people of the Americas ever derived from West and North Africa. Consequently, Herskovitz crafted the theory that blacks arrived in America from the transatlantic slave trade, which allegedly brought in more than 10 million African slaves. According to the National Archives of Spain and Smithsonian records, there was no evidence to prove 70,000 ships with black Africans ever sailed to the Americas. Melville carried out the teachings of his mentor, Franz Boas. Boas, Masonic pillar, is named Boas, to make the original copper-color races of the Americas inferior and the European presence superior. Before this time, blacks coming from Africa through the transatlantic slave trade story never existed. As a result, Melville's work has been fragmented and used as propaganda by writers like Harold Corlander and Alex Haley, which further perpetuated the myth of the transatlantic slave trade through his hit movie, Roots. Americas were black people and they were not brought here on ships. Instead, they were enslaved right here on their own lands. If they were brought on ships, the numbers are extremely exaggerated. It was published that 15 million to 20 million slaves arrived in the Americas between 1540 and 1850, over a 310-year period, according to U.S. history books. The Stewart synopsis points out a few questions that should be examined. Now, this is factual, so this is what I'm talking about when it comes to this guy. So don't go looking up this guy's book and telling me I'm a lunatic. So we're just talking about this right here, okay? Number one. Over a period of 300 years, it is fair to say that 60,000 slaves were transported annually to the Americas, or has the transportation of slaves to the Americas been one big myth? The largest seagoing vessel carried 400 slaves, but not all the ships were that large. 5. Timing of passage was 3 to 4 months. That means 200 vessels or ships per year would have to travel carrying 300 people. One ship could make 3 passages per year. The Transatlantic Slave Trade database says that there were 1,100 to 1,400 voyages made over that 300-year period. If that is the case and each ship carried 400 people, the total number would be 560,000 Africans were transported. It still does not add up. 6. We already know that over 83% of all Americans with African ancestry have Native American blood. 7. Did Native American tribes help slaves escape, or were Americans with African ancestry already part of the Native American nations? So, and then Stewart's synopsis lists these black Native tribes. The Washita of Louisiana, who we talked about. And then think of the name of our capital and think of the name of our first president. It's more mockery. Washington? Washita? They were paying homage to the people they had just conquered. We live in a crazy time, guys. We live in a crazy time. Nobody knows the truth anymore. So this is all open speculation. The Yamasee of the Southeast, the Iroquois, the Cherokee Indians, the Blackfoot Indians. Yeah, a lot of them. And I'm going to keep looking into this. But yeah, the Rockefellers are a bunch of liars. And they know something. And just to wrap up, we have a very sketchy Rockefeller institution inside of a national park, federally owned, on the coast of Maine, where the Illuminati bloodlines all have vacationed here in giant cottages for quite some time. And then we have another Rockefeller, a brother or something, down here in Georgia on Jekyll Island doing the same thing and allowing the Federal Reserve to be created here. And in both cases, there are tons of occult connections. I mean, Arcadia, Acadia, we already know. We already know what the meaning of Pan, that god, is. And then down here, you have the Rockefellers building their cottage on top of the altar, sacrificial altar of the Wale Indians, who are on average 8.5 feet tall with pretty spectacular technology. Pretty crazy. Yeah. All right. I'm going to keep doing some research. I'll see you guys later. Hope you have a good day.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940-41. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats in open battle, man to man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war, and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.